I thank you for being here tonight. I know I'm tearing you away from the TV and all of the wonderful things that are going on right now.
You mean CNN?
Keep glued to the set. But hopefully you all have it on record, because it's only, what, 12 more hours today? I don't think anybody's ever heard of Bob Flexner. How do I work this?
There you go.
Bob, is there anything coming out?
Yeah.
Bob Flexner is probably the world expert on wood finishes. I took a 2.5-day class with Bob back a few years ago, and so I'm trying to condense that into 55 minutes tonight, so we'll see what we can do. Finishes, and talking about finishes, is a little bit like trying to pick a religion or to decide on who your spouse is going to be. It's a challenging thing. I'm not going to cover everything. I'm going to cover the ones that I know about, with pluses and minuses as we go along. Any questions, happy to deal with. Right up front, I'll tell you I don't do pens. So I asked our 2 pen experts here what they do with pens, and one does just CA, and the other does CA and friction polish. So that's the end of the pen discussion. I had to deal with Neil DeVore, and he's moving away, and it really came from a friend of mine years ago who it's when comb-overs for men became fairly common. And the two of them pledged to each other that if either of them found the other with a comb-over, that they were to take a gun and shoot them, put them out of misery. I had the same deal with Neil with regard to doing pens, from my point of view. But only so much. Well, and also segmented. So. And that's just to say that picking, what you want to do is important. Finishes. Part of it is understanding what finishes are. And a definition of a finish is something that alters the surface of the wood and also offers some protection or durability to the wood in some manner. And that's, so dyes, for example, are not a finish. They do alter the color or the appearance of the wood, but they don't do anything to preserve it. Waxes are really not a finish either for some other reasons. All finishes really almost all finishes fall into 3 categories. One is just a surface film, period. That's what it is. It is some variety of a compound that is attached to the surface of the wood, and it provides gloss. It may change the color a little bit, but it is something, it's a film that lays on top of the wood. The other extreme are the oils. And the oils penetrate into the wood, into the cells of the wood in different degrees, and they have other properties and essentially nothing on the surface. There are 2 kinds of oils. There are oils that are penetrating oils that get hard in the wood, and those go through a process where they enter the cells of the wood, and the oils themselves bind with the wood and go through a process called polymerization, where they become a solid within the wood. So different depths that they go into, and whether or not it changes the chemical nature of the layer of the wood. There are 3 common polymerizing oils that will harden in the wood. One is walnut oil, one is pure tongue oil, and the other is linseed or flax oil. Now it gets tricky after that. I don't know, many of us are old enough to remember when we could buy raw linseed oil. Anybody nod their head, remembers that stuff? If you go to the hardware store, you won't find it probably anymore. The problem with raw linseed, which was just pure flax oil that was pressed out, is that it will cure over time and become a solid, but it's a very, very long time for that to occur. To speed that process up, they originally started doing a process where they would heat or roast the oil, and they called it boiled linseed. And so what you see today with the label boiled linseed is a penetrating oil. It does harden within the wood, but it has a nasty sidekick that goes with it. In order to get it to harden, they're adding a chemical to it called Japan dryer. And Japan dryer is a heavy metal compound that speeds up the process. So if you're doing a floor, or you're doing a chair, or you're doing anything that is not going to come near your lips, that's a fine idea. If you're doing salad bowls, on the other hand, it's not a good idea. The problem with boiled linseed, depending on the wood, depending on the environment, depending on the temperature, it's almost impossible to determine at what point they'll fully polymerize, which leads to the other question, finishes that are food safe, finishes that are not food safe. The answer is all finishes are food safe if they are fully cured and fully polymerized. And so it's important to know when that happens and when that occurs. With boiled linseed, I once made the mistake of doing a little walnut platter, and I used boiled linseed on it. 6 months later, my wife was having a ladies' thing and put out some cookies on that platter. And so afterwards, I went to have a cookie, and they'd been sitting around for about 3 hours on the platter. And it turned out I was distinctly eating turpentine, on a 6-month-old platter. So I do not use boiled linseed for anything at this point in time. The other two are, and to my knowledge, there's no way to get raw, nor do you want to get raw flax or raw linseed. The other two that are left are pure tongue oil and pure walnut oil. And they both are polymerizing oils that will bond into the wood and go through a process and become a solid with the wood. If they are pure, the tongue oil is from the nut of the tongue tree, and walnut obviously is from crushed walnut. Actually, the walnuts available comes from right here in California. Our friend Mike Mahoney, many of you know, manufactures it, and so that is a primary finish for anything that's going to be used for food service. There's another dimension then to choosing finishes, and that comes into, first of all, what are they all, and then second is, what are you going to do with them, and lastly, what do you want them to look like when you're done? So I'll come back to that. So we have the pure oils, then we have the finishes that are purely a coating, and probably the one most common is a lacquer, and that can be rattle can lacquer like this, or it can be one of the two-part catalyzed lacquers, which you need a spray rig for, an HVLP sprayer. Field of Ore uses that a lot. Wipe on poly is another example of it. And the friction finishes, friction polish, and then also French polishes. These essentially, they bond to the wood, but they don't penetrate into the wood, they don't harden the wood. They do provide a surface protection. The remainder of the finishes all fall into a hybrid category. And almost everything you're familiar with using that's a varnish, a Danish oil finish, they have elements of both a surface finish and also an oil. So you're getting oil that's penetrating into it and then also a small amount of surface finish. One of Bob Flexner's really gripes immensely is that there is no disclosure requirement for the paint and varnish companies. Anything hazard they have to put in their sheets, but otherwise they can't tell you what's in it. What I can tell you approximately, any of the Danish oils are about 50% linseed, maybe 60% linseed, thinner to the extent of, say, 30%, and then 10% of some variety of resin that's a surface film. So when you use a Danish oil finish, you will get some penetration in the wood, some hardening of the wood. It will become a solid in the wood, and you get a very thin film across the top that can add a little bit of gloss and whatnot to it, generally a satin finish. Those are the primary elements that you're involved in. So you've got a group of, and they all have their purposes. The next question then that comes about in choosing finish is, well, what's your purpose? If it's, let's take a salad bowl, for example. Any kitchen bowl that's going to be used repeatedly, you want it first to be food safe to begin with. Secondly, you want it to stand up under being washed with water. And lastly, you want it to be able to be rejuvenated over time if you need it. One of the problems you can use, there's a number of, there's salad bowl finishes, I think from Balin and a couple of others that are glossy salad bowl finish. They advertise it's food safe immediately. I believe them. My problem with that is anytime you have a surface film, if there's any scratch to it or cut through it with a knife or a salad fork or whatever, then water can get under it and then the film lifts. And if it's a poly kind of finish that's on the top, at that point, basically you're done. There's no way to recover from it. So for any food service bowl, my own personal thing is I don't want to have a film on any of it unless it's something that's going to be used very, very lightly and not be washed. If it's going to be something that's going to be washed and used on a daily basis, then one of the two oils, either the pure tongue oil, and by the way, I mean pure tongue oil, not tongue oil varnish. Tongue oil varnish will also have a surface film and other stuff in it, but you can buy the pure tongue oil as well. Either that or Mahoney's, the walnut oil. And I use the walnut oil extensively, basically on all of the food service items. It darkens it up a little. So pluses and minuses. The oils also will darken the wood a bit. And if that's not something you want, then that's something to be aware of. If it's going to be something that is for decorative use, an artistic piece, something to be admired and looked at, then you've got your choice of the whole range of finishes. If you want it, if in your opinion it would look best if it's got glossy, bright and shiny, then in order to do that, you must absolutely have a surface film because the oils will not let you get to that point. You can put an oil on underneath. That's the other point, is that any of the oil finishes, you can apply those by themselves and then come back with wiping poly, with lacquer, with a friction polish, any of those things on top of it. Or you can start out with one of the hybrids and you get both kind of all at the same time. At the end I'll talk about basically how I sort of narrow it down as to what I end up doing personally. The question about whether or not it should be shiny, should it be a satin matte finish, that's a question of art and what you like. My personal direction in that, and it may change over time, it has, when I do hollow vessels that are round, and I sand them out to a very fine finish, and then I like to take those to a real high gloss. That's about the only thing I do that way. Other things like natural edge bowls, like the ones over here on the counter, I tend to do those with an oil plus a finish, but I like it to stay as a satin finish. That's just my way of going.
You say you sand to a high level, how?
A couple of ways, depending on what it is, depending on the wood, Carlos, 600 grit. For those who were here for the demo I did using the Yorkshire grit, How many saw that were here for it? Okay. Yorkshire grit is a wax that has a very fine grit mixed in with it, and you can use it as a part of your finishing process. It's not in itself a finish, but it does sand it out. So that's another way to do it with that. It really depends a lot on the wood. Some you can't get out to that fine a finish. One of the things of using a hardening oil underneath a softwood, for example, I do a lot of buckeye burl, and it's pretty soft stuff. And so by using a penetrating oil that polymerizes in the wood and hardens up the surface so it sands out, finishes out much nicer than it would otherwise with just a surface film. The lacquers have been popular for a long time. Neil DeVore does 95% of his work with lacquers, has for years. He's got an HVLP, expensive system, a two-part catalyzed lacquer. Lacquer requires multiple coats. It's like lacquer is preferred by the cabinet makers hand over fist because it gives them a way of getting a very nice, it dries very quickly, gives them a way of getting a nice finish without the problem of dust contamination because it dries so quickly. Lacquer is also extremely repairable as long as you have the right equipment to do it. I personally, in my own, again, personal preference, I don't have much use for lacquer. I don't use it except I did it for Christmas ornaments and things. I wanted to get a quick finish and just use a rattle can, to do that. But again, you've got to do multiple coats in order to get multiple thin coats with the lacquer. It does not work, those that use Danish oils or finishes that have some stain mixed in the oil in the past. Anybody use that? It doesn't work for turning. And the reason it doesn't work for turning is that your absorption rate and the end grain is different than your absorption rate is on side grain. And so I made the big mistake of doing that originally. So I had bowls, a couple of bowls that had real black globs on two sides and then nothing on the other. It's very non-uniform, and so it's kind of pointless in that regard. So the different ones going on down through, I told you that there is a food-safe Danish oil finish. There's only one that I know of, and that is made by a company called Tried and True, and they've been using the same formula. I think it's 1908. They're actually doing boiled linseed the original way, where they're roasting it. And so they're blending that with a resin. And this is perfectly safe. There is no chemical in it that will harm you if it's still not perfectly dried. And I like this a lot for use on a variety. I don't use it in salad bowls and things, but I will use it on other stuff where I want a matte finish. Yes?
Why don't you use it in salad bowls and such?
Well, because it has a film finish on the top.
Oh.
And it's my preference. Part of it is...
does give a little bit more of a luster than the oils do.
And
That's because of...
And that's something to explain also, is that it depends on your purposes. If you're doing them from yourself, most of my stuff I'm selling.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really don't want to have is comebacks. I don't want, or a disappointed client downstream. And so I try to think further ahead in terms of, I'm willing to risk some of the things. I did a very nice large walnut salad bowl that had little defects, a couple of defects I had to repair, and I used a filler to do it and see, hey, I won't sell it. I gave it to my daughter. I said, let me know how it works out over time. But she understands that if it fails, it fails. But I wouldn't sell something like that to somebody. So that affects, my choices and what I make. On the other hand, if it's for yourself and you're willing to take the risk, I think probably 90% of the time, a surface film on a salad bowl, if you're reasonable with it, probably is fine. But it's that 10%, that I don't want to deal with. It's hard to organize all of this stuff. The tried and true finish, you have to, you have to be a little careful. Rockler carries it, but they carry, this is called Danish oil finish. Danish oil finish is 10% or less of the surface film on it and a varnish. They also sell a Danish varnish that has a much higher concentration of film. And in order to get the Danish oil, you have to order it online, and you just look it up. I don't remember where I get it. It's not carried by any of the major providers of, for the wood turning world. Tried and true, the nice thing about it, things like Watco, I used Watco for 40 years, through all of its different chemistries. And it changed over time as California changed its laws. Watco is mixed in terms of how long it takes between coats. It depends on temperature in the wood and so forth and so on. The tried and true Danish oil finish is much, much, much faster than that. And it dries up pretty quickly. The other finishes, a number of people are using a wipe-on poly. That's fine. Wipe-on poly, in my experience, does not dry very fast. So you can apply it either by hand as a finish on top of oil, or just on the wood itself if you don't want to darken the wood. You can also apply it on the lathe. But I don't know if anybody's had success with getting it to dry on the lathe with the heat of turning on the lathe. I have not. Anybody that's a wipe-on poly fan? Is that?
Yeah. If you use a wipe-on poly on your lathe, I found the secret to getting a nice shiny finish is have your lathe turning as slow as you can get it, and put a coat on, let it set for half an hour, and then come back and put another heavy coat on, where I go to the point of tipping the can up and pouring it on. And you know, you're protecting your lathe, but just let it drip on there and wiping it on at the same time. And I don't know if it makes any difference, but I have my lathe turning in reverse. And then when you get done, I just leave it on for maybe 2 hours. And it seems to fall. When you put it on heavy like that and not wipe it on, or you wipe it on heavy, it seems to not get the runs in it that you would think with it running slow. Don't turn off your lathe and it'll keep finding its own self.
The advantage, I think, to a clear finish that is just a top coat that wipe-on poly adds, chemically it's a much more durable top coat than either a lacquer or a shellac finish is. The downside for me is that the length of time involved in dealing with it, kind of messing with it. If I'm going to do it on the lathe, personally I want it to be done now and free up the lathe. Most of my finishes I finish off the lathe where I've got a table that I'm dealing with and so forth. So I was kind of disappointed because I thought with a wipe-on poly it's inexpensive, it's widely available, and it would work out well.
Bill? Yeah, I use wipe-on poly almost extensively, and I do it by, the first coat can go on fairly thick and it soaks in rather rapidly. Typically it's dry probably within a couple hours, but my thought is I put the wipe-on poly on, let it set for 1 day, come back, sand it with one of the sponges, not the sandpaper, the Scotch pad, the green Scotch pad, to get the sort of nibs off, put another coat on, and this coat goes on much, much lighter. And I use a piece of old t-shirt cut into squares about like yay, and I just dip in the finish and wipe it on. Let that set for a day and then go back and typically do 3 coats. And I've had very good success with it on the items and salad bowls. I have a salad bowl that I know is 10 years old. And I just went back and did a few repairs on the bottom of it a little while ago.
You don't have your lathe running?
No, this is just setting the bowl in the shop. And I do it, I don't do it after I sand it or where it's dusty. I wait till sometime when I know I'm going to be clear. And wipe-on poly, take an old bandsaw blade and break off sections about this long and turn them into a V. Put the teeth up and you can set your bowl on that. and the finish doesn't, doesn't stick to anything, and you don't have to put it on a piece of paper or something like that. I do like 3 coats, and then if I want to buff it, I'll take it to the buffer and buff it. But like Bill said, I do 3 days plus a buffer, so there's a lot of time spent doing that, but I don't turn molds to sell or speed or anything like that, so I take the time on getting them done.
Yeah, I think in terms of just the surface films that I know of, polyurethane is probably the most durable and chemically resistant. For example, lacquer, other than the catalyzed lacquer or the 2-part lacquers, it reacts to some people into the oil in their hands and becomes gummy. I'm one of those people. I get around, if anything that I touch fairly frequently has lacquer on it, turns the surface gummy. And so that's part of my prejudice. And I'm not the only one out there that's that way. The catalyzed lacquer doesn't work that way. The friction polishes are a shellac with a lot of thinner. The one I use is Milan's. It's applied when the lathe is running. Use very small amounts. You first, with the lathe off, you just wipe it on real quick, and then you turn the lathe on and use very small amounts, and it polishes out to a real high sheen. You wait a couple minutes, you put a second coat on, you put a third coat on, you put a fourth, and you get a really, really high build. Works nicely for things like pens, for bottle stoppers, for decorative items, that are ornaments, things along those lines, things you want to really, really pop out and shine, and you want it all done, because the moment you turn the lathe off, when you're done, it's dry, it's done. And so it's nice in that regard. The key to, and if you screw it up, you get too much on, you'll get some big streaks. There's 2 solutions to that. Just plain denatured alcohol will wipe away the finish. It is sensitive to alcohol, and you can take that off. Yeah, Bob?
It's illegal now in California. You can't buy denatured alcohol.
You can't buy Mylons anymore?
Denatured alcohol.
Denatured alcohol.
Since when?
Since a couple of days ago when I tried to buy it. They said the governor.
Oh, I have 3 gallons at very reasonable prices.
I'll take it.
So we can do a caravan. I mean, the woodworkers in California forever have been arranging trips to Reno for a lot of reasons. Just to another one. Dyes are the same way. Half the leather dyes you can't buy in California. So you might, trip out to your hardware store if you want some denatured alcohol and get it quick. Either that, or probably, just some good gin would work, I suppose. The friction finishes are nice. They're quick. They're predictable. They're repairable. They're not excessively, durable. They're okay if you get, but they can be fixed. And that's kind of the range in those of just surface films. There's also French polish, which is make it yourself. It's a shellac, and I think it's a denatured alcohol and shellac blend, is it not? Yeah, I see a couple nodding, so we'll take that as a yes.
Not anymore, apparently.
No, it used to be that way. Let's have another gallon of that. Other stuff. To answer your question here, I no longer use Watco on anything that I'm doing for turning. I do not use a tongue oil varnish on anything I'm using for turning.
Why don't you use the Woodturner?
Dries, it takes too long to dry.
Okay.
Even if I don't care about, and it's not, there are alternatives that will dry quicker, let me put it that way, and set up. Particularly when you're doing burls where you've got little pits and whatnot, one of the problems is the finish goes into those pits, and then you wipe it all down and it's all nice. And I mean, when you apply one of these blended finishes or these hybrids, you apply it on liberally. Some of it will soak in right away in different spots, otherwise it won't. After about 5 minutes, you wipe it all off. You remove all of it's there, and then you set it there to dry. Drying, what causes polymerization of the oils in the wood, and if you're using either pure oil or you're using one of the hybrids, the two things that affect the rate of, well, three things, the rate of polymerization. One is the nature of the wood, how much penetration there is, and so forth. Secondly is temperature. Third is oxygen, air getting, it's air getting to it. So what I found the best thing is that, I love it in the summer. I'll do a wipe on either just a pure oil or one of the hybrids, and I take it out and set it out on our deck in the bright sunlight. I've even gone to the point of making reflector boxes a couple of times to, heat them up good. And so in July, something with Watco or with one of the others, it'll dry pretty quick. December, it's more of a trick. So what I end up doing, I heat my shop, but not that warm, so I'll bring it in and, with my wife's concurrence, set it on a dining room table for a couple of days.
I've got an old lab oven that I can dial from like 60 degrees to 300, and so in this kind of weather, the parts I'm going to show over there tonight, one bowl, I oiled it at 3 o'clock this afternoon and put it in a 90-degree oven. So heat and temperature in this time of year. And I also had the bowl warm before I put the oil on. So there's ways around it, but you have to have another piece of equipment.
When I took the class with David Ellsworth, many of you attended his demo, Ellsworth uses this finish called Waterlocks. And Waterlocks has a very mixed reputation. It is, I don't know exactly what it is. It's a tung oil blend with a resin finish of some sort. It produces a beautiful, gorgeous, high gloss finish. Oh, before I forget to mention this, never buy any of the finishes that are satin finishes. If you put on multiple coats of a satin of any sort, what you get is a cloudy finish. Get the high gloss, and if you want satin, then wipe it down with pumice or wipe it down with 800 grit paper or steel wool, and you'll create the satin look, but you won't have a cloudy look. So ban any of the satin finishes from your inventory.
What's the combination of that?
I'm sorry?
What's the chemical combination of waterlocks? Waterlocks. What's the
Nobody knows.
waterlocks?
That's
Tung oil?
It's tung oil and a resin surface coat of some sort and a thinner of some sort. What's remarkable about it, though, is how incredibly fast it dries. You can take a well finished, so the first coat will penetrate. My normal thing with it is I will do 2, maybe 3 coats of it. The first coat will penetrate in and just suck right into the wood, and you wipe it. No more than 5 minutes do you let it sit, if that. In the summer, you better make it 2 minutes because it'll start setting that fast. You wipe it off and let it sit for a day. Come back the next day, put on another coat. Again, 2 minutes. Wipe it off best you can. Most woods, 2 coats are going to be enough. Some you need 3. The problem that has bugged waterlocks is that once you let oxygen into the can, in a very short order, that can turns to jelly. It sets up and you lose the rest of the can. And so there were a whole bunch of schemes to deal with that. One was to buy a bunch of marbles, and every time you dump some out of the can, dump some marbles in to fill it up to the top again. A second that Craft Supply and others do, they sell you Bloxygen, which is I believe a nitrogen gas, and you spray that into the can to replace, it's heavier and it replaces the oxygen in the can. That's its own problem because the oxygen can doesn't weigh anything, so you don't know if the can is empty or full or what's going on, or if you put enough in or put in too much. And it's not cheap. This stuff isn't cheap to begin with. I mean, that's a $30 little can of it. It lasts a long time, except for this particular problem. So what I started doing is, courtesy of all the nail salons and all of the stuff that's going on, you can get little 2-ounce bottles, glass bottles on the web, pretty inexpensively from, they're being made in China, I assume. And I decant all of my water locks into those bottles, and I found that basically, once I crack it, I use that little 2-ounce bottle up pretty quickly. That works, except that I'm buying 2-ounce bottles all the time. So when Ellsworth came and he stayed with me, and he'd introduced me to this stuff, and I sort of bitched about my system, and he said, hey, why don't you turn the lights on, under your hair up there, there's another solution. And I said, oh, what's that? He said, well, I said, eat gelato.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's an interesting comment. He said, yep. He said, Wendy and I, we have gelato every night, and we end up with these little bottles. And he said, now, what's the difference between water and oil? Well, oil floats on top of water, right? So what Ellsworth does is he'll decant all of his water locks into a little clear bottle like this. And then when he dips them out and uses it, then he'll pour water in, which goes to the bottom and brings it up to the top again. So I've yet to do it because I still got all these filled with little bottles. But that is the secret to it. And it's a lovely finish. It really, so you get penetration of the oil, and you get a nice gloss. It finishes and it dries incredibly quickly. And so all of those things work for me. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's gone on the Craft Supply website and seen their little video on water locks, but I guess Dale Nish used to do the same finish. But he recommends using Deft thin 50% of lacquer thinner to put on a first coat, and then put on a couple of coats of the water looks over the Deft. Now, what that does, I don't know.
Dale used, I actually was in the last class that Dale ever taught, and Dale uses a sanding sealer, which is basically thin lacquer, on everything, across the board on everything he does, or did, as a first coat. And the Deft is just, it's a lacquer, and it does that. What that does, it can harden up the wood so it sands better, fills some of the pores, and it also stops the finishes from penetrating into the wood and changing the color. So if that's your objective, is to avoid the color change that would come with a penetrating oil, it's a good technique. One of the recommended, highest recommended, is a Zinsser seal coat for to do that sealing process. So that's an option in that regard. I just use those 3 coats. What you can also do, maybe to save a little bit of money, and I've done it, you could put the first coat on with just straight pure tongue oil to get penetrated in, and then follow it up with the water locks. So my choices are, and what I'm doing most of the time, I'm either doing a straight oil finish. Now, if you want a little more gloss with a straight walnut oil, Mahoney also blends together beeswax and walnut oil together. And you can do the same thing yourself. Take some beeswax and heat it up carefully, don't catch it on fire, and then blend in some oil with it, and you make a paste. And so the beeswax is organic, and hopefully the bees didn't bring anything foreign into it, and mix it with the walnut oil, and you can put that on, and that'll give you a gloss on salad bowls and things, and you can repair and make them look better. Another issue with the walnut oil is that if you keep washing things in the sink and using them and whatnot over time, I tell people, do not use soap. Just rinse it out. The salad oils and whatever gets into it, that's just fine. The other thing I suggest is to, because the water is going to raise the grain in a way you couldn't, you're going to get some raised grain, or after you start using one and rinsing it in the sink. Well, just normal wiping it down over time will lift that grain off, and you'll develop a nice patina. If you want to speed that up a little bit, the Scotch-Brite pads that are white, that are designed to use on Teflon and whatever the new things are now, you can put that on a little bit and help. And then add some more walnut oil. And for customers, I said, just go to the salad oil department in a good store, and they've got walnut oil there, and just put that on. Talking about oils, also, the other thing, for butcher blocks, kitchen utensils, salad forks, things like that, the walnut oil is fine for that. You'll see a lot of recommendations for people to use mineral oil on things. Mineral oil will always remain a liquid. It will never polymerize. It's okay, but you're going to lose it fairly quickly because it doesn't harden the wood any. It's used a lot in butcher blocks and whatnot, but if you see something that is advertised as butcher block oil, hopefully it's going to be the walnut or tung oil that adds some more protection. Yes?
Yeah, there's a butcher block oil that I bought at Home Depot that we use on a butcher block, and I also put on some mortar and pestle that I made. And it consists of mineral oil, carnauba, and beeswax. Okay. And it works very well. It's not harmful. I mean, it's neutral. It won't. There is some concern about some of the oils, like any of the vegetable oils. I mean, olive oil or whatnot would actually polymerize in the wood, but it also has a habit of getting odoriferous in ways that you don't want to have. Mineral oil won't do that. So, but again, it doesn't offer the hardening feature in it. You can add any of the waxes to it as you're going along. Now, are waxes finished? No, they're not. Why aren't they? Generally, they don't change the appearance other than to add gloss. And what you end up generally with a wax is a one molecule thick of coating that will make it a bit more slippery. It will make it more scratch resistant because items will glide on it rather than on furniture, for example. And it will polish out to give it a higher gloss. And so that can be very nice. If you buff with a wax, actually you'll get, even with all your finishes, you've got little irregularities that are in there, or little, the end of cells that are sticking up. And the wax will fill into those. And so you can get a much higher gloss and smooth finish with it. So using a wax on top of a finish is perfectly acceptable. It in itself is not a finish. It just adds to it. There are several varieties out there. We did a demo. Yorkshire grit is beeswax with a fine pumice that's mixed into it too. The pumice breaks down over time, and so it actually is an abrasive at the same time, and you use it with the lathe turning, and it actually helps finish. They say you take the sand to 220, and after that go to the Yorkshire grit. Dr. Kirk Scratchfield, many of us know Kirk. Kirk's last name.
They hear.
What?
They hear.
Yeah, to hear. And he's been here and done it. And this is stuff he makes, he sells through Craft Supply. Same kind of thing. It's got a very fine abrasive mixed into it. There's others that are out there that do it also. Those are fine waxes. You can add any other kind of a wax. Lemon oil wax. This is kind of nice for boxes because it'll keep the smell inside the box, and you take the box off and you get this cute little lemon oil smell. The British Museum. had paid for the development of a polish that is very resistant to hands and to time. It's a microcrystalline wax called Renaissance or Renaissance, depending on which way you want to do it. It's expensive as sin. It's very durable, does a really nice job. It'll last on something forever. It's repeatedly used for antiques, and it is a wonderful finish. This little can, I think, is $35 or something like that. It's not cheap stuff.
When I first started turning, somebody told me to get a can of that, it would last the rest of your life. We've done all of our kitchen cabinets, I've done our leather couches, I've done a lot on the different woods, and I don't think I've used a quarter inch of it. So I think it's a can for life.
Is that comparable to Doc's microcrystal
Yes.
finish?
Yeah, it's well, supposedly. Again, all of these things it's kind of guesswork to know what's really in them because they don't, they really don't disclose. You can make your own, a couple of things, if you're into do-it-yourselfing. If you want a Danish oil finish, you can make your own. Take either some tung oil or Mahoney's walnut oil, and take 50% of that, about 40% of a thinner of whatever, paint thinner, odorless paint thinner, whatever it is, and then 10% of wipe-on poly or another clear finish, and voila, you've got Danish oil. If you would like to make your own Yorkshire grit or one of these waxes, so take any wax, and you can buy pumice and add it into it. You can also buy some diatomaceous earth. I tried to get some at your hardware store in Penn Valley, and I said, well, I just want the smallest one I could get. Well, I got a bag like this. If anybody wants it, come on over, and you can have as much as you'd like. It's a 5-pound bag, it's the smallest quantities because it's used, but you blend that in, and the diatomaceous earth and pumice and there was an article last year in one of the, about how to make it in one of the American Woodworker issues through the AAW. So those are two things you can make yourself, and take proud. If it's really good, you can make it Williams, whatever it is, So that's kind of the range of the things that I do. Now, to finish off, I'm very prone to me, the feel of a bowl. It's one of the few pieces of art that is designed for your hands. It's designed for you to feel it. So things like shape, the form of it. I mean, when I teach classes, I bring a student over and they look at me, they say, how is it? And I say, what is it? And he said, well, I think it's perfectly, it looks right. I said, fine, close your eyes, run your hand in. Oh, there's a lump, I couldn't see that. Or there's a little, and if you should test all of your work with your hand. Your hand is capable of detecting it is astonishing how precise your hand is in terms of finding irregularities. So if it's a curve, it should be a continuous curve, coming on through. The same thing, the shapes you're making should be shapes that are friendly to you. You see in a lot of, Mike Mahoney, his characteristic bowl shape is on a salad, any kind of bowl he makes, you find on the inside, there's a little bit of a recurve. That it doesn't come out like this is the inside of the bowl. At the very top, it curves back a little bit. So that when you pick it up, your thumb hooks, oh yeah, and it doesn't slip out of my hand. Now it's subtle, you don't see it. I get a chuckle out of when I do craft shows or art shows, and somebody will pick one up and they'll sit there and they're just playing with it in their hand and get it smiling. And I know what's going on. They don't know what's going on. They just like the feel of it. And so part of that feel also is having a nice, smooth finish surface. Any of these finishes you apply as best you possibly can, with the possible exception of a 2-part catalyzed lacquer system, you're going to have little bumps. You've got, at least one of you probably has some dust in your shop, right? And it's going to get into your finishes. I buff everything. The Juhl buffing system, I told, and I asked our extension cord so I could demo it tonight, but I decided you guys have a good imagination, so I'm going to put this down. First off, can you imagine that we have either a lathe head here, or we have a motor. All right, everybody got that down? The Juhl buffing system consists of, when you order the system, you get 3 wheels like this. And either you run them on a separate motor or you run them out of the head of the lathe. They're all loose. They're 8-inch wheels. They're designed for 3 successive abrasives, as it were. The first is Tripoli, which is a red rouge. It's the coarsest of it. And you can take something with just little fine, you can feel on the, it's irregular. You close your eyes, you run your hand over it, and you'll find it's irregular. You take, now here's our running lathe, and this is spinning. You can imagine I'm going to take the Tripoli and just hold it here so it picks up on the buffer. Then I'm going to take in my bowl or whatever it is, and I'm going to hold it and keep moving back and forth. And you can immediately see a massive difference in the texture on that. If you've had any runs or streaks by accident, sometimes that'll take it out by itself. But it'll change the smoothness and the feel and the appeal of the whole thing. You can stop right there. There's nothing I ever make that I don't buff with at least Tripoli.
The same with your salad bowls and stuff?
Yep.
Oh, you still do that even with the food, that's a food-safe wax, the Tripoli?
Tripoli is just an abrasive that comes right off.
Okay.
And I wipe it out afterwards.
Yeah, okay.
The set runs about $85. You get 3 wheels. This is 3, there's one in between. You get Tripoli, you get white diamond, which is a finer abrasive, and then you get a hard carnauba wax. Carnauba wax cannot be applied by hand, it's too hard. It's the hardest wax known, it has to be applied under heat. So, on the wax, the heat of the buffer will pick it up on the buffer, and then you can apply it on the wood. You also get, if you buy the $85 set, you get a buffer head. It's like a mop, a little round one. I forgot to bring it, so that you can get, and you get the same thing. You get the 3 of them, the 3 different ones, and they're marked on which is which. And that's so you get it into the inside of bowls on the inside curves. They sell a set that goes on a lathe and it's got 3 wheels in a row. Don't buy that. Do not buy that. It's fine for doing the outside of bowls and things. However, in many cases, I'll borrow one of these over here. In the larger bowls, again, pretend we have this moving head coming out that's here. I can buff much of it by here, by carefully holding the bowl and sliding it over the end and going around inside when I'm doing it. A trick to know about. Undoubtedly, if you haven't done it before, one of your early experiences is going to be having the bowl that you just finished spending 4 days working on. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever done. It's the only piece of wood you've ever had like this, and you get it all the way down to the end, and you're right there, and then whoo! Off it goes, and it bangs into the wall, and so that ends that one. Julio Marcolongo from Australia gave me a hint on that. He said, tell you what, till you're really certain about it, take some cardboard boxes, put them on the floor filled with just crumpled up newspaper right under your buffer. And they'll act as catchers for you. And after a while you sort of learn not to do it.
Do you sand as far as you would normally sand if you're going to buff?
I'm sorry?
You sand as far as you would normally sand if you're going to buff?
Yeah, I typically, it depends on what it is. I'll sand to at least 320 on everything and 400 on most things. I rarely go past that except on some special hollow vessels. So the sequence of things anyhow is first Tripoli, second is this white diamond polish, and then the third can be the carnauba wax. The carnauba wax, there's some people have mixed thoughts about it. You apply it with a buffer, but if anything in its lifetime occurs to it so that the wax is removed or something happens to it, the customer has no way of rejuvenating it other than it's got to come back to a buffer. I've kind of moved away from using this. It chews it up a bit faster, but I take Renaissance wax now, put it on my finger, put it on the buffing wheel, and I've been using this in lieu of that. It's not as hard, but it also, if there's a problem, it can be applied by hand later on. Whether that's a good long-term solution, I don't know.
And what RPM are you usually buffing at?
1725 is the, I've thought about, it seems with the 8-inch wheels to work out just fine. I've got a 3450 motor that I've been thinking about setting up to do the mop heads because they're not really turning.
They're so centered.
Well, smaller diameter, you know, I haven't done it yet. You can run them in your lathe, you know, there's a fair number of people end up somehow with a second lathe along the lines, and you know, or third or fourth. I'll be 5 next week. That's just because Jack is loaning me one for. But you can use your lathe to set it up, and you just grab these in and quick to change. You put a if you're going to do that, they sell a
Standard.
they sell a mandrel that would go into the lathe that's a Morse taper. The problem with that is a Morse taper only holds when it's being pushed against. So to keep it in the headstock, you need to have pressure from the tailstock to keep it in place.
There is it is threaded at the end.
Yeah.
The one from
I have a lot of
They
Yeah,
have
so
a
I've
threaded
brought
one.
mine.
the one from Beal?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, that was what I was going to say. The other thing is you can get
Where
it.
was you getting that one, the threaded one?
From the wheel.
Well, you can have, on the end of a Morse taper, you can have a threaded insert, and I think it's a 1/4 x 20 thread.
Yeah.
And so through the head, you run a long,
It's raw.
all thread, a threaded rod, and a cap on the end, and it holds it in place.
You have to put it on the end though. You can't just put that rod in there to keep it in. You have to, on the end of it, you have to have a nut.
Yeah, a nut or a flat thing on the end, and you tighten it down against the
It's
wheel.
better to use a wooden washer rather than a metal.
You can also, another option if you, if you're familiar with a Jacobs chuck, that's what's on everybody's drill. You can get a Jacobs chuck that's a 1/2-inch Jacobs chuck that has a threaded insert in the end. You've got to shop around for them. But you can, and that's very useful for a lot of things and tools because you can use that, then you can just grab this bolt on the end and use it. But then you can also use that Jacobs chuck to do a lot of other things. You can use it to drill with on the lathe. You can use it to do bottle stoppers to hold that insert in. So that's my way. You know, you get more out of that. You can buy one made in China for about $20 somewhere.
I don't know if I got it with the Beal system or not, but I have about an 8-inch extension.
Yes.
That has an 8x1 inside thread that goes on the headstock, and then I can attach the wheels on the other end. That
Yeah.
way I don't have a rod going through the headstock.
Yeah. That's not made by Beal, but it, yeah, I remember the
I
name.
can't remember.
Beal also makes I think it's 4 or 6 inch extension that fits on the end as well. So you've got a real deep hole you're trying to work with or something. There's some things you just got to work around. It's a little bit hard to do it, but I use it for everything. And I think it's a worthwhile accessory. It'll last you forever. So, I think I've run out of, unless there's questions.
You haven't explained why the face shield.
I'm sorry?
You haven't explained why the face shield,
Oh,
I guess
well,
there.
that was in case anybody was throwing apples. No, do you want to explain? Yeah, there you go.
So I buff about everything, and I was in the industry, we buffed all kinds of plastic. This face shield was covered with some form of paint. My son-in-law had thrown it in the garbage. As you can tell, it's a perfectly good, usable wood-turning face shield that I just buffed. Take your I've got some other different buffing compounds, but if you start with the brown one, take off the crud, go to the white one, and I have actually taken my old lenses that have scratches that are, like backed up 2 or 3 prescriptions ago, and you can make them usable again as eye protection. So you can do a lot more with the buffer than you think. The reason I brought this was because I knew the subject, and so you can see, you can't see buff marks, you can't see anything. There's still some crud on there, but there's all of like maybe 5 minutes worth of work on this shield that was ready for the garbage.
Buff out CA moves fast.
Not very well.
That brings up one of my earliest things in, I was working on a burl and I was using CA, cyanoacrylate glue, to penetrate into some bark inclusions that were in there to hold them in place. And I'd sprayed with the quick fit, the setting stuff. But it doesn't, the accelerator doesn't get down into inside. So like a fool, I then flipped the lathe on, and the bigger fool is I was standing right in front of the lathe when I flipped it on. So I was really, really, I've always been grateful that I wear glasses because I've had several close calls that I didn't think about. And that was one when I got splattered with CA. It comes off my face eventually, but the glasses protected my eyes. So I've since learned. But what I did find out is that guess what? The CA remover, which is largely acetone. Even 6 months later, took it off my glasses. And so if you're dumb enough to do that on your face shield or on your glasses, I don't recommend you do that on your nose. You just make it happen naturally, but it won't take it off.
That might work great on glass, but I've tried the debonder on my face shield and it cracks the glass. It makes this wonderful spider crackle effect that ruins the plastic.
Certain plastics, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I did that too with it on the face shield. I'd forgotten that, but what it did, it showed up where it had a hit that it had absorbed and it was coming out.
So you had mentioned CA glue. I was getting glue stains in my wood when I would go to mend cracks. And the lacquer, because it is a surface finish and doesn't sink into the wood, now I take the shake lacquer, and I spray it on the wood before I glue, and I don't get a stain and it sands right off.
Did everybody hear that?
No.
In some woods, if you're using CA, it'll stop things from penetrating into it, and so it will create either a dark or a light spot, whichever it is, I guess. But if you use a sanding sealer first, or a lacquer into it and then sand it back, before you apply the CA, that'll work. Carl had some experience, something he was doing along those lines too, didn't he?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And the sanding sealer works what keeps the CA glue from discoloring the rest of the
Then you
wood.
don't get glue
Yeah, it
stains.
depends on the piece of wood. So, any others?
Just a couple, did you say a couple words about just pure shellac?
Yeah, pure shellac,
edible, I guess.
Well, if you like dead bugs, yeah.
If you like M&Ms.
I had to do that, and I had learned to eat scorpions in Cambodia, but that was another story. No, pure shellac, yeah, that's, you know, it's a fairly durable finish. You can use it. The friction polishes use it. I only use it in that format, but I don't have any experience with it other than that. Well, thank you. Hope that's been helpful. Have any questions? Happy to do it.